Once you hook up on the rod, you don't need to do the pump and wind like conventional rods. You just hold the rod in your armpit and use the reel to do all the work. The rod absorbs the whole lot, and while you can wind, and when you can't, just let the drag slip and the fish can take some line. But it's amazing how much pressure you can put on these small rods. Slow pitch jigging, slow jigging, what is it and how do you do it? So light jigging, micro jigging and slow jigging, all completely different. And slow jigging slow pitch jigging is something that sort of requires unique tackle. So you need a unique rod, like a slow jigging rod, and sort of a specific type of jig rather than a traditional jig. So for slow pitch jigging, it's all about matching the rod and matching the lure. So this is an amp slow jigging rod. It's a PE 2 to 4. It's good for 150 to 350 gram jigs, but it's sort of key range is around that 250. We're out wide at the moment, 100 something feet, fair bit of current. So around the 150 gram jig, which is just nice for this rod. So the jig I'm using is a Palm Slow Blat, and it's an S model, which is the center balance jig. So the idea of that jig is it has a lot of action on the fall, which is perfect for the slow jigging. When you're letting your jig down, because the jig is designed to flutter, you really need to slow that jig down a little bit with your finger on the spool, just so that the jig sits vertically, and that'll actually make the jig go faster to the bottom rather than what you would think if you put your finger on the spool, you're going to slow the jig down. Another important thing with slow jigging is everything, your whole presentation needs to be vertical, and in order to keep that presentation vertical, you need to run as fine line as you can. So we're running like a P 1.6 out here today in 100 metres. The fish you're catching, they're not going to break 20-pound line, but you want to keep that whole presentation vertical. The idea is to keep so the action that you impart, if you get your line with a big drag in the current, you're not going to be able to impart the action on the jig that you need to. Slow pitch jigging is all about the rod-reel combination, and you're not doing a lot of action yourself with the rod. It's all to do with the reel. So all you're doing is short half turns, quarter turns of the reel, which gets that rod tip bouncing, and we're on, which gets the rod tip bouncing, and it gets that jig with a nice flutter. And the whole idea with slow jigging is to tempt inactive fish. So the fish you're targeting aren't active enough to chase conventional jigging methods where you're doing that cranking up and down, pumping and winding. This is just fluttering that jig in the zone for long periods of time, and it does a good job of tempting inactive fish. As you can see with the rod, you just load that rod, just crank on the reel, and just wind that fish straight up. Sounds easy until you got 100 metres of line to wind up. So quarter turn, half turn, you can see the rod is what works that lure. That dip in the rod and the pulse up, that's how you get the action. The jig is especially designed for slow jigging. It's a Slow Blat S for slow jigging. It's a center balance jig. So you can see from the shape of this jig, very symmetrical, and it's designed to flutter down rather than rear weighted. So it's not designed for speed at all, but when you do those quarter turns, it sort of spins up, flutter for a second, spin up, flutter for a second, and it'll act like an injured bait fish that can't really get away. So it's not, the whole idea of this technique is to tempt fish that aren't really actively feeding. They don't want to chase this bait, and they see this thing as a fleeing bait fish that can't get away. It's only just moving a little bit, but it's fluttering and carrying on, and it stays in that zone for a very long time. So I only run a top hook on the jig, so put that on with the Number 4, 90-pound ring, Van Fook, and I'm using the Jigging 3.0 in the short twins, but because it's a short symmetrical jig, those twin hooks are perfect length. So when you're tying your jig to your line, tie your line to your assist hook solid ring. By tying to that solid ring, then you've got a split ring attached to your lure. We're going to deeper water, we want to change colours. Simply split ring that lure off, new colour is on. So when you're travelling, I like to take the jig off, you just tie it onto that solid ring. Makes it easy just to hook onto your runner. You've got no weight, no jig bouncing around, nothing's going to get damaged. It's pretty easy to understand why this technique is now one of my favourites. It's ridiculously easy to do and to wind fish in, apart from the 100 metres in between. But if you get a chance, grab yourself a slow jigging rod, get offshore and use this technique, because it really is so simple and so much fun. Well guys, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you want to find out what I'm up to on a day-to-day basis, just jump on any one of my other social media pages. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm constantly putting up a couple videos a week now to keep you guys entertained. Otherwise, this has been Dean Silvester, Fishing My Way.